I've trained in jiu-jitsu academies across the globe, from some of the fanciest corporate gyms to small backyard dojos, and I have to say, Chris Haueter's combat-based garage is one of the most unique spots of them all. Chris is a 6th degree black belt under Rigan Machado, making him one of the pioneering American black belts in the art. Beyond his martial expertise, he brings the discipline of a Marine Corps vet and the vision of a gifted artist to his teaching approach. Chris, thanks for having me back in your garage.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. You're the original Jiu-Jitsu video guy.
And you're the OG BJJ guy. Man, that's...
One of them, yeah.
And what an interesting place. You know, most academies are kind of sterile, and this feels raw and powerful, and your artwork is incredible. Is there anything in particular that stands out?
Well, like I say, obviously not all of this art is mine. If you recognize it, it's probably not. But like that's one of my pieces right there. That's one of them. I've got a bunch that I haven't hung up that I've been meaning to for ages. Yeah, I kind of have what would be called lowbrow art, which is like comic books, street art. That's kind of what's always attracted me rather than the fine art world. But I appreciate the fine art, and I often classify the jiu-jitsu in those things too. That there's the more lowbrow, streety, punky version of the jiu-jitsu, and then there's the classical fine art version. As I've aged, ironically, I love going back to the original roots of this jiu-jitsu thing we do. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
And I notice all the senseis in your picture always kind of have this meathead type of look to
Yeah.
them. What's the idea behind that?
Well, like this guy right here, this is the grand master of all jiu-jitsu, my fictional guy. His name is Shuto Palubra, and he's like the meathead grandmaster that everybody bows to and is a real badass, but at the same time has one area of expertise, and that's jiu-jitsu. Don't go to him for any other thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, pretty much I just started hanging things on the wall because I didn't have anywhere to hang them. Like I say, I got a box of other people's patches that have given me that I really need to get out the ladder and stick more stuff on the wall. I didn't really plan on having a garage dedicated to the jiu-jitsu. It was one of those things, you live in LA, rent's expensive, we've got this garage, my wife says, get the cars and tools out of there, let's turn this into our jiu-jitsu, and that's what we did. And it just kind of took off from there.
I love it. So you got the chess analogy up here?
Yes, the chess analogy, the poker analogy. Ironically, that's a piece I did in 2011, and if you look in the back, coming out there is the current President of the United States.
Nice.
I could say I predicted him. And over here, I love that piece right there. Growing up in pre-pornography times, I'm old, there were what was called men's magazines, which was a lot of like adventure, romance stories of being a badass and having the girl fall in love with you, and that's kind of my view of that. And then you'd see the ads in the back of the magazine to get cool weapons and learn secret martial arts and stuff. Like everyone from our era grew up having these visions that there are secret martial arts out there that you could learn.
That's right.
And then, like sometime around like high school, doing wrestling and all that, I kind of dismissed that there was that until I experienced Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in Horing's garage, and suddenly was like, wow, there really is magic. Because back in the old days, it felt like magic. Being a wrestler who'd done Muay Thai, it's like I cannot believe how easily I am owned. Cannot believe it. Yep.
How fascinating.
Yep.
So, Chris, you're known as one of the Dirty Dozen.
Yes.
First 12 American black belts. How does that make you feel? Do you feel a sense of pride? Do you feel a sense of responsibility having that title?
I mean, in some ways, what I feel is lucky. I happen to be in the right place at the right time, discovering this martial art before UFC, and I knew it. So, like, I distinctly remember when I left Horing's garage being like, I've hit the gold mine. Because I was doing Kali, Jeet Kune Do, I fought Muay Thai, I did wrestling. Like, I felt like I pretty much knew martial arts and that there wasn't any magic. And then here, I discovered this. And I remember realizing why it wasn't popular. Because when you saw it, it just looked like, especially a guard, looked like two guys rolling around in karate gis, and it just seemed weird. But then when you felt it, it was amazing. And so
what year was this?
This was 1989, 88,
Wow.
or is it 87? It's somewhere way back before, like shortly after the wall fell in Europe. The world had changed, and here I was finding this amazing art, and there's a couple things like I knew eventually would get popular, especially after UFC. I remember watching UFC 1 and evaluating whether I would have won. And I think I would have won most of those. Because back then, I was a purple belt at the time, and you just knew the power of this art. Yep. But I knew also, as it started to become integrated with other combat sports, that the cat was out of the bag. Mm-hmm. That so much of what we did, I often think of the combat sports / martial arts are the technologies. So back then, it was like when you were a purple belt, you felt like you had an AR-15, and the other guys had muskets, maybe lever action. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, everyone's getting ARs. So it's like you got to improve the way you shoot. You got to improve optics. So it's that constant arms race thing that has always happened within all the combat arts, right? And by 1995, the arms race was on. And it was kind of cool being the first, just from the point of an amateur historian anthropologist. That part was awesome. But in terms of feeling like I had to uphold something, I mean, there's certainly some amount of pressure on my ego, but not a lot anymore.
Okay. Yeah. Let me go back to that day. How did you get the invite to go to Horing's garage?
Well, I was a few months off of my one and only Muay Thai fight, which I won, but hurt really bad. And I was going to the junior college with the intent to join the wrestling team. And the Mitz Yamashita, who was the Aikido club guy, was on the mat. And I was checking the schedule when wrestling practice is because I want to join. And he was showing these Aikido guys mount escapes. And as a wrestler, I'm looking at this and I'm like, Mitz, I don't think that'll work. And he's like, why don't you try it? And of course, I exposed my back. He catches me. Here's this older Aikido guy. And I thought like this was Aikido on the ground. I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't even know it existed. And he said, yes, but technically I'm not allowed to even instruct it. It's kind of a secret thing. Here's the guy who can. And I called that day, and I was hooked from the moment I experienced being controlled on the mat. Just absolutely hooked.
So you started at Horing's garage, but you ended up with Hegan. Right?
I ended up with Hegan. That's a whole long, lengthy thing with all that inter-family rivalry and battles that were happening and all that. I remember being at Hegan's house when somebody was sent over to remove the mats. I remember Hegan and Hickson hugging it out and kind of overhearing anger towards Horing. And yeah, it was just kind of the big split, I call it. Right.
Big family drama. So thinking back on from the late 80s until now, there's been a lot of changes in the art. Do you feel like overall this is a progression? You mentioned the arms race. Do you think it's been a good progression, or do you think some things have gotten lost along the way?
Yeah, I think ultimately, yes. Like, as an amateur anthropologist, zoologist, I like to look at things, how they evolve in time. And but cultural evolution is a fascinating thing. Like, one little tweak can alter how things evolve. Like, had Russian Sambo rules taken off, we would be practicing an entirely different art, because environment is stronger than will. And you will adjust to the environment in which you are in. The group adjusts. And so things that, like when sport jiu-jitsu was really working out its rules, and Abu Dhabi was working out its rules, and we all have preferences of which rule sets we like. As soon as you create that environment, you're going to alter the art. It's inevitable. And as soon as you are doing it to get people to want to watch it, to put butts in seats, you are altering it. Like when MMA added rounds, like that completely took, where it was like the grappler had the big advantage, suddenly it evened it out. And is that good? Even though that's all a person's matter of opinion, right? But yeah. And then it also, because of the sport, because you're not allowing strikes, it enabled refinement into particular areas, especially in the guard, that if a person was always throwing blows at you, you would never develop this, right? De La Riva guard, spider guard, gi-reliant things, like none of this would have happened if we started with MMA rules and kept MMA rules. Right. So as much as, like, I love all of the arts and sports, the one I find that I like the most as I age, which is what I call the art of Jiu-Jitsu, which I'm sure, not positive, but pretty sure, that what the Gracies were practicing in the late 60s and 70s was very similar to what the Japanese were practicing as Judo was branching off and becoming the sport form of Jiu-Jitsu, right? And again, the environment, not only the rules that people make up, but the culture changed it. But Brazil was definitely what I call much more hip, flowing culture. So that's going to change it from the Japanese, which stay very regimented and protect the art, right? Which is also good, right? Like by having leg grabs, low single legs, you ruin judo. You're no longer practicing the upright art of the clinch. And to preserve the upright art of the clinch and the throw, suddenly when MMA is involved, now that's good because you can adjust that upright stance more readily to punches and kicks than you can the squatted over wrestling sport jiu-jitsu stance.
Hey guys, I'm here to tell you about the world's best fight shorts, the Nogi Ghost. If you've ever owned a pair of our shorts, you know these things last forever. With the Ghost, of course, there are no outer pockets that toes or fingers can get caught in. The high-quality embroidered logos will never fade or come undone. They come in 6 different colors and 2 lengths, a 7-inch inseam or a shorter 5-inch inseam if you want to show off your quads. The flexible gusset and the 4-way stretch material will ensure that you don't feel restricted in any of your movements. The stretch waistband and drawstring allow for a bit of variance in your weight. Whether you add a few pounds or cut a few, they'll still fit perfectly. And lastly, if you're like me, you might wear your shorts outside the gym on occasion, so we have a hidden inner pocket for your phone or keys. I can proudly say the Ghost is the best fight short in the world, and I hope you'll give it a try. So Chris, I've heard you talk a lot about your, I'll call it your mantra, the combat base philosophy, art, fight, and sport.
My philosophy, yes. And again, I can't say I made up or invented any of this, but I assimilated it. I often think most martial artists, if you use the analogy of music, most of us are cover bands. Some of them are such good cover bands, they're better than the original that created the song. I'm a mashup guy. I love mashups in music. My jiu-jitsu game's very much a mashup. Sometimes you alter the tempo, taking 2 songs with a totally different feel, blending them. I just like that aspect of art. And my general philosophy is, in order to break out of our human brains, which is so stuck in the way our brains think, right and wrong, yes and no, stand up ground, you need a third perspective. And so I became obsessed with trying to figure out what are the 3 arm bars that are the most essential, 3 throws, stand up, clinch, and ground. Like, how do I break this into 3s as opposed to 2s? And most techniques, you're doing an action to get a reaction, which is very binary. And I find that even some of the best grapplers in the world cannot explain why they are good. There's a sense of feel that we have in here that really cannot be captured by watching it, whether it's on a 2D screen or walking around. You have to feel it. And so yes, in essence, You think street for the honesty of it. The original reason why you wanted to learn any of these things was to learn how to defend yourself, defend life, the most primal route. You train the sport. You don't think sport, you train it. You got to experience real resistance against your peers. Otherwise, you'll start believing in magic, which happens with a lot of arts. That it takes just a generation of no longer sparring, and you will end up with an art that is bullshit. And you practice the arts, so which leads you, when you think self-defense and sport, that third point is the art. And what do I mean by the art? I mean, how do I control and submit my opponent utilizing the least amount of athletics and attributes without strikes? How do I control and submit them? That's the art. The sport is, how do I deploy my art within the man-made rules of the game using all of my athletics? So right there you have a black and white shift. And the aspect of the streets, kind of like the overall umbrella, which brings you into history, is like, why are we doing this way? Is it because of the rules of the sport, or is it the original intent, which is to defend yourself in combat?
It's an amazing philosophy. Makes a lot of sense.
Thanks. Generally speaking, fights start standing, and you could go to a lot of jiu-jitsu schools and academies and be a couple months without ever doing any stand-up.
Yep.
And it's totally understandable. Why? Because in some ways it's a whole other art, right? When people are coming to learn jiu-jitsu, which is how do I control and submit people on the ground. If I wanted to learn judo, Greco, wrestling, that's what I do. But, as we know, competition, fights begin standing, and if you're a good player in that game, you could win a lot of fights by never going on the ground and preventing. And it has been said that the hardest person to bring on the ground is a multifaceted grappler who doesn't want to go on the ground, right? It's like really hard to take a guy who's done jiu-jitsu, Greco, judo, wrestling, and grab him and put him on the ground.
Sure.
So a lot of what I like to start every class with something standing, then either a throw, a shot, takedown, a ground technique. I teach things in short chains, 1, 2, 3 chains of options. And then we isolate those spots and roll it. And for a lot of years, I might teach a move and say, okay, guys, well, let's everyone roll. I found that then the people just go to the game they like.
Yeah.
But if you do like isolation drills, all right, one guy gets one grip, you get no grips, you can grab my head or my feet, but no cloth grips. Then it changes how you will react on me, right?
Right, because I want to go here, but
yes.
you can't.
But I'm isolating one part of your or someone in the class's neglected game.
Sure.
And I'm trying to find out like areas where my guys, he's a little weak on open guard or whatever, so he's going to start open guard. And so it's like, generally speaking, in grapplers, we tend to lead with our righting hand. Whether it's judo, wrestling, we tend to lead. Strikers tend to keep their righting hand in the back. And like I remember in the early days, working with people like Randy Couture and others, trying to get grapplers to get a sense of kickboxing, you realize how unlike it is. And how the feel of grappling, when you try to do that feel when you punch, it's just horrible, right? And the same as if I'm trying to have this feel and I try to apply that in my grappling, it can be horrible. But how to integrate it is the key. So we always remind ourselves that fights begin standing and that this is the primary target, my face. And if I'm leading with my face, now my hips are out of the fight. So I can't counter. I can stop you, but I don't have a counter. I've got to get my face out of the fight and keep my hips in. So like I use a classic Hickson entries where my hands are high, I have a light lead foot because I want to make that step, hold you off. And once I have the chance, I'm working on getting my hips in rather than my arms in. And so yeah, everything we do, we begin standing, but of course it opens up the whole game where we start with I grab a grip, you reach over, grab a grip, I'm controlling your elbow, you have mine, and I want to feel where I connect to you, where you connect to me, and where we connect onto the ground. I want to have that sense of light feet and heavy hips. Not heavy feet and light hips. And when we get nervous, our body has that reaction. So you're relaxing and reminding to have that feeling of lightness. And I'm always checking your elbow, forcing you to have to frame. So when you have to, that's what opens up my game. Because all good, but jiu-jitsu is reactive. Now, there's going to be someone who will argue, and 10 years ago I would have argued. But really, that's the essence of jiu-jitsu. And most of the things I work, I want to be hand aware. Because it's the hands that will hit me, stab me, punch me. So if I'm just grabbing here and we're doing all this stuff, I could still hit you, right? So, but feel my hands, but close your eyes and just stop me. So now you're very hand aware. So just this alone improves your grappling. You worrying about me hitting you makes your grappling better. Because I'm a grappler. I want to make my grappling improve. So like I say, I always think straight.
That's amazing. So Chris, I didn't realize until just recently, I know the garage is called combat base. I didn't realize that you were the one that coined the term combat base.
I did coin the term. I definitely didn't make up the move, like being here in a combat base. But like a lot of the techniques that I learned early on, there wasn't names to. And the king of naming things is Eddie Bravo, right? How did I not name this combat base, but like bong hits or whatever? It brought, like, I would probably gotten more interest. But yeah, and there were a lot of things like,
It's just amazing that, in Brazil, there's hardly names for any of the moves. I remember asking guys, what's this called? Oh, it's called a choke. What's this one's called? It's called a strangle.
Terms
so you know what we're talking about. So I think it's wonderful that something as simple as combat base has a name, and it makes sense logically.
Yes.
Is it a position that you have specific?
It's like in vintage Marine Corps, you shoot from prone, kneeling, offhand, standing, and what I call this is a combat base because it enables you to do a combat in any range. It's that in-between phase from offhand when you're standing or laying down on the ground prone. And it's when you sit like here in a base for a long time to really find a base, and then you realize, oh, that works in grappling as well. So a lot of times I think we arrive at the same conclusions but come to it from entirely other areas, and I just didn't know what to call it, and that's what I called it.
Wow. I think just the idea that a lot of people don't have the thought of going to combat base. They open the closed guard and they stay here.
Yes.
And it's so much smarter to get that leg in.
Yes. So also that's an aspect. As I've aged and have knee and hip injuries, getting up is a lot harder. And one of the drills we used to do in what I'm going to call vintage garage jiu-jitsu reminded me of the Japanese iato, which is the art of the draw. And if I have to put my hands on the ground, that's not good. I need my hands. I want to feel like through my hips I could draw my sword and stand and go from kneeling on the ground where you're doing your classical Japanese stuff. And I realized that the in-between point is the combat base. And when I first learned it, I learned it from, I want to say it was Jean-Jacques Machado back when I was a blue belt. Because at first, like everything, you feel out of balance. Like knock me over, whatever. I feel out of base. Right. I have to find my base, those subtle shifts. And of course, when I'm here, you can choke me, lock me very easily. But just having that lead leg up stops a lot of attacks. And I'm not so high that when you get a sweep, it's a damaging one. It's a very comfortable in-between range. And if like you spend months just practicing defensively holding a base and offering arms, offering necks, and see how much I can just alter and stay in my base. What you realize, if I shift too far back, you'll knock me over. If I lean too far forward, you'll sweep me. So like it's finding the middle. Like one of the things Hickson has been working with me on the last 8 years is finding the center, the middle part, thinking of your midline, mine, keeping these lined up and feeling that three-dimensional axis of movement. And per my threes, it's hands, head, and hips. We're having a grip fight, we're having a hip fight, and a head range fight. And the head is probably the most neglected in Jiu-Jitsu. Not so much in a Greco because you're using your head but in Jiu-Jitsu, it's often like people are passing like this, where you could punch me in the face. I'm also out of base. And in order, when I'm out of base, I will make that up with athletic balance. But if I force myself to not use athletics, I have to find the leverage. And a good drill we do, hop in a combat base. I take one of these heavy bags, put this on your back, and just reach up and hold it with one of your arms there. Just hold that right there. See, if you're not in a good base, like if you're like off over here, that's really bad.
Makes me more off.
Yes. So you realize that we're cheating because we're light up top. But we want to imagine where we're heavy, where you can hold a base right there. Then you throw the bag off and you suddenly now have a really good base. Right? And that's kind of one of the little learning tricks I do with a lot of, and for me it's like when I teach, I'm also trying to do the same research you are. In science, there's something that we do where we always do our own work. Unfortunately, that became an internet meme. Do your own research, which like they missed the meaning of that, because what you realize is there's such a vast amount of knowledge that you cannot live long enough to find it all yourself. I cannot learn enough OChem, Gen Chem, physics, biochem, all this to even understand. I can scratch the surface. And the same in Jiu-Jitsu. I have to rely on some expertise. And because in this limited time I have, where when I was born, my hourglass was turned over and the sand is falling. And somewhere in that middle range, I've got my athletic years. And that time is even smaller. So I'm looking for efficiency. And I'm training for the body I'm going to have 10 years from now. Not chasing the body I had 10 years ago. So in some ways, but I mean, you're living in the now, but with that presence of flowing. So a base, which is that neutral thing, I'm trying to find where my hips are in range, where I can pass my routes, and if I can hold this spot as long as I possibly can. And avoid you having some oomph behind a shot. Yes. So now when both of us are hand aware, but not having a pancreas and slap fight, because that ruins it. It's just being hand aware. But by you being aware of my hands, your game goes drastically up and fast. And that's what I mean by think street. I don't say train street. I say think street.
So to bring us back to the basics, when you open the closed guard, do you always go to combat base?
As I've aged and because of knee injuries, no. But I still often do.
Because I find with beginners, when they open the guard and they stay on their knees, like you don't accomplish much.
You don't accomplish hardly anything.
Boom.
You're open to almost But when you go into the combat base, yes.
Now everything changes. You have to go to open guard, daily heave, or whatever.
Yeah, and you're clearly arm safe, basically neck safe. And the fun thing is for every technique, there's an equal and opposite counter, which is just as good. There is no magic move. What there is series of interlocking techniques combined to form algorithms, and we're having a battle of algorithms. And I want to constantly read how much athletics I'm putting my. You have to put some, but I want to see, can I technically improve this? Like we don't remember because we haven't been new to this for a long time, but new people just being here with their head off the mat, their neck would be totally sore,
True.
right? And we're comfy here with our head always off of the mat. And lazy jiu-jitsu is bad jiu-jitsu. And where we are the laziest is in our hips and our head. Our hands are active, but my hips and head aren't moving at all. I really want to feel what happens when my head changes its spot in space. And a lot of that comes from what I learned years ago in boxing and couldn't apply it for ages 2 grappling. And then when I realized, head awareness, that's like the whole key. And then you like feel like, wow, how did I not know that, right? That thing that we experience in this art.
So good. Thanks for sharing, Chris.
Thanks. And learn from lower belts, because that purple belt that has just learned this new game, so it's fresh, and they remember how they learned it. They can often show you in ways that the guy who's been doing it for 20 years can't show you.
That's true.
It's like, oh yeah, you just reach up, grab here, and move. It's like, but that purple belt, we like, no, see how he moved his hips here, and then the art.
Right, the art. Chris, you and I and everybody are getting older.
Yes, we are.
My training has changed a little bit as I got older, and I'm wondering if you have any advice for the aging grappler.
One of the things that I've noticed in myself is there are definitely periods, and I think almost the jiu-jitsu guy will, like, say you're rolling around and some purple belt's working on a move, you'll go, God, I remember I used to do that all the time. Like, that was my thing. It's like, it almost as if it was erased out of the brain. Like, I'm convinced at least my brain can only hold so much knowledge at once, which are in 3s. And if I try to have 6 ways to pass it or whatever, I just need 3s. And jiu-jitsu is the art of adaptation. It's how do I adapt to the environment in which I am in. Not try to force my combat sport or rules onto it, but how do I adapt? That's the nature of the jiu-jitsu really is defense. It's not offense, it's defense. And Hickson even said to me like last year that, like, you know, my father told me when I'm young, I do not believe this, but now I do, is like all good jiu-jitsu is defense. None of it is attacking. It's how do I, when in the spirit of Aikido, how do I use my opponent's intent, energy, movement against him and adapt and flow? And so, like, chasing the art as you age suddenly becomes actually really fun. Like, there was a period when I was 48 to 55 where this knee was killing me. And I could no longer go into posture. I had to leave my leg hanging out here and be in this awkward thing. And ironically, I could still apply the same posture things in this horrible way. And that kind of opened up this whole other feel. And then, like, when I would be working with some of the greats, like whether it's Jean-Jacques or Hegan or Hickson, I pay attention to how it feels. Not what steps I'm learning, but how it feels. Even Hickson said once, this was right before the COVID hit, like, he's like, there's nothing I can show you that you don't already know. But you can get the essence and the feel, and then your growth is limitless, right? And as long as I'm intently trying to not use athletics, It's going to force the technical growth.
You think there's any limit? You think you'll be grappling until your last days?
Well, as kind of a Taoist, I think there's both. Everything is limited, at the same time nothing is. And that's one of those traps that our brains are always in. That third point gives you a perspective which suddenly opens limitless. Yes. So yeah, I think, I hope I will always be adapting to my aging body.
I hope so too.
Thanks.
To forever adapting.
Forever.
With jiu-jitsu roots stretching back to the 1980s, Chris naturally offers deep experience and perspective. Exploring his triangular fight, sport, art philosophy proved genuinely enlightening, as did discovering the surprising origins of the term combat base. His wisdom on training sustainably through life's later chapters provides invaluable guidance, whether you need it today or tomorrow. The Combat Base Garage stands as a hidden gem on the global jiu-jitsu landscape. Who knows what amazing dojo our journey will reveal next?